Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. It's 6 o'clock in my house. It's dinner time. I can smell the soup. So I want to thank you for joining me anyway, since I can imagine you're hungry as well, or maybe you're eating a pizza right now. I can't. I'm going to talk about developing skills and actions for the next 30 minutes and do a demo. And after that, we can do some Q&A. So let me kick off. This is me, the one on the left. I'm Piet van Dongen. I live rather near Germany, in Arnhem, in the Netherlands. I work as a cloud consultant / senior software engineer at Luminis. And I recently wrote a white paper on cloud migrations. It's in Dutch, by the way, but it's going to be translated soon. Not in German, unfortunately, but in English. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? First, I'm going to explain to you what voice assistants are and are not, and what their position in our field is. Then I'm going to do a presentation on designing for voice. Then I'm going to explain how to build for voice. And then do a demo. Is everyone able to see my screen? I just got a message from a colleague that he's only able to see my face, but I think I'm sharing. My screen says I'm sharing. Let me see. No, I'm sharing. I think this is all okay. I can't see your chat. Show chat. So nobody is chatting then. Oh, here's the chat. Oh, I see it. Oh, thank you. So you're seeing it right. So my colleague is missing. Okay, missing out. Okay, so about voice assistants. So what are they and what are they not? Well, you have several types, but a voice assistant, if it's be it Alexa or a Google Assistant or maybe a Siri, is a virtual assistant for anyone that you can use to perform tasks or, for example, get a recipe or set an alarm clock or maybe do a quiz or something else. And the idea behind a voice assistant is that it's a assistant that is available to you, personal assistant that is available to you anywhere. So you can have it on your watch or on a Google Home, like the one I have here, or on your telephone maybe. And it does all sorts of things for you, and it's super smart. And they solve a particular set of problems. For example, like I said, if you don't have your hands available to look up a recipe, for example, you can use your voice assistant to get one for you or read it out loud for you, step by step. It's also ideal for disabled people, for example, the visually impaired. They can't use a screen anyway, and a voice assistant is very handy in guiding them through, for example, navigation or maybe some stuff they can do in the house or for looking up information. It's also ideal for safety purposes. For example, if you have a car and you want to send a text message or you want to look something up or you want to know the score of a game you want to listen to, you can use your voice assistant while keeping your hands on the steering wheel. And it's integrated with, for example, Google Car, is that what it's called, and Apple CarPlay. Or you can just use your phone and invoke your voice assistant while driving. The most interesting application for me or philosophy is that of ambient computing or ubiquitous computing. So the idea is that This type of technology enables you to use computing power anywhere and everywhere. So a voice assistant is always available if you have a smartwatch or a mobile phone, and in the home, in the living room, you have a Google Home or Alexa device or a Siri device. So the idea is that computing is all around you always. So you can use it instead of, like I used to do when I was a teenager, crawl behind a computer, desktop, and then look up information. You can do it now anywhere, anytime, even in a field like the woman in the bottom right. So that's the idea about behind ambient computing, which voice assistants fit neatly into. Now the question is, how mature are the virtual assistants? If you look up Google Assistant Phil or Alexa Phil or Siri Phil, you get all kinds of funny or alarming interactions with voice assistants. Sometimes they take you too literally. Sometimes they don't seem to understand you, but in the end, they just seem to do understand you. Or they tell your wife that you love someone else. So they are not always working as expected. Alexa 2 years ago did something that made all the Alexa Echo devices laugh creepily in the middle of the night, which scared their users. And the most heard complaint about voice assistants is that they sometimes just don't seem to understand natural language. Well, that is their goal. So apparently this is a super hard problem, which is why, for example, Gartner placed voice assistants in the peak of inflated expectations in their technology hype cycle in 2017. So that's 3 years ago. And the danger of being at the peak of inflated expectations is that you'll either end up nowhere or slowly, year over year, end up on the plateau of productivity. So in this case, voice assistants were 5 to 10 years out of getting to getting to the plateau. A year later, they were a little further out, but still over the peak of inflated expectations. Last year, they were in the throes of disillusionment, which means that people seem to be disillusioned with this technology, but still they were now 2 to 5 years out of being at the plateau. And this year, they haven't moved an inch. So I'm curious if they'll ever leave the throes. I'm betting they will, but who knows? I don't have a crystal ball. Okay, so for the ones that are still believing in the power of voice assistant, the next part is about designing for voice. So the idea is you want to use a voice assistant to give your users something to do, and you have to design this interaction. So like in web interfaces or mobile applications or web applications, you have to design a user experience. So in this case, there's no screen, there are no pixels to design for. So you have to design for voice. And we use our voice to do something in forms of conversation. So you have to design dialogues, in this case, dialogues that end users have with the assistants. I'm also going to talk about how this works technically. So what happens during a conversation, what parts of the conversation should you pay attention to? And I will talk a little bit about how to design a backend for a voice assistant. So in case you have some fulfillment you need to do on your servers or in the cloud, for example, you have a smart thermostat and you want to talk to it, then you'll probably have to do something server-side to enable the smart thermostat to do what the user wants. And lastly, I will show you how to deploy a skill or action, as they are called. I'm going to talk about focus on Google Assistant and Alexa, by the way. I don't have any examples on Siri, but development for Siri is largely similar. So before you design a conversation for voice, you have to step back a little and think about if voice is the right fit. I can imagine you wanted to jump into this technology, but sometimes it is not the right fit. So that hence the hype cycle. It's a little bit of a hype still, but it's not always a good fit. So ask yourself this before you start designing. If it is a good fit, then you can start designing IDs for users. So types of users that will use your assistant and use cases for them. I will go into this a little bit more later. You have to create a persona. So the assistant you're talking to has to have some kind of personality, which makes users feel like they're doing a natural conversation with it. Otherwise, it feels forced or like you're talking to a robot. And that's not the goal of a voice assistant. It should really feel like a voice assistant. So, for example, if you would watch the show The Good Place, there's an assistant there named Janet, and she is almost like a real human, which makes conversation with her very naturally. And you see in the series that people tend to trust her with more information than they are plan to, which is not a goal, by the way, for us. Okay, so after you created user IDs and personas and use cases, you start writing example dialogues and then test them. And I don't mean test them in production with a voice assistant, but you test them on paper with users. So you write out a dialogue. Oh, by the way, if you, I will share the slides later because there's so much more information to give you on this topic than I give you now. So you can, if you're interested, you can read those guides. So how to design the dialogue that I just talked about. So first of all, you have to understand the elements that a conversation has. Then if you do, you have to start writing scripts. So for a complex conversation, like this one from Google, where they made users, enabled users to use the voice assistant to visit a Google I/O conference, it can become quite complex. The demo later on is very simple, but the basic elements are the same. So you start with a natural conversation, a script you can write out and then go from there. And you can test with the people you had in mind, the types of people you had in mind when you created the user IDs, the types of users. For example, for the demo, I've designed a application, a skill or action, and the user can invoke it by saying, I have to put my hand on my assistant now. Hey Google, talk to Namesayer, for example. Or Alexa, talk to Namesayer, which will invoke our skill or action, our voice assistant. Then the voice assistant, the skill or action, will say, hi there, I am Namesayer, and you are? So you can imagine a person on the other side of the internet that says this to you. This is how it feels. Or in your room, in case of an assistant, a speaker assistant, for example. So you start the conversation and you get a response, and the assistant prompts you to say something back, to get input. So you say, in a case of Emily, Emily, or hi, my name is Emily, or I am Emily. So you see that you have to design for lots of types of responses because natural conversation isn't very black and white. People can say all sorts of things and mean the same thing. I will show how you do that later on. And then the assistant responds with, hello there, Emily. So nice to meet you. I have to run. Goodbye now. Just kidding. I can't run. Bye, Emily. Which is funny. At least I had fun designing this. But what you see here is that it's a response. And it's also a completion of this whole session. It's called in Alexa terms or conversation in Google terms. So the idea is that you end the whole conversation here, and the session that the user has, so the talk, the conversation, is ended after this. We'll get back to the example in the demo. Okay. Backup about the types of conversations you can design and implement. There are some pre-built skills or actions, and they are fairly easy to implement. For example, you can do quizzes for Alexa, trivia, flashcards, and the idea is that you use Alexa or Google itself to build such a conversation. For example, if you have homework to do and you want some flashcards, you can put in your input by having a conversation with the assistant, and then after that the assistant has a flashcard for you personally, a set of cards or a quiz. There are also types of verticals which are a little more complex but still trimmed down to a certain use case. So a smart home is a vertical. For example, a client of ours asked us to do a voice application for their smart thermostat, in which case we used the Alexa smart home and Google smart home verticals. And the idea behind this is that the conversation is something you don't have to design. They do that for you. So for example, if I say, Alexa, raise the temperature by 5 degrees, then everything, all input in that conversation is already how do you call it? Parsed for you? Sorry. Parsed for you. So the actual input you need, so those 5 degrees that you have to raise the temperature of the thermostat with, is given to you. And then you still have to do the whole backend thing where you get the thermostat temperature, raise it by 5 degrees, let the assistant know that everything went okay, and then you're done. So the conversation part is done for you. The technical part you have to implement. And you can also do fully custom conversations where you have to design the whole conversation and do all the back and forth of the conversation. The demo is a fully custom conversation, but a simple one. But I chose this one because then you can see all elements of a virtual assistant application. So the pre-built types I already mentioned. In Alexa's interface, you can just select them with your mouse or your interface. And I discovered last week that the Google Assistant pre-built types are going to be deprecated because their developers, or at least the users, the developer users of Google Assistant, have indicated that they rather do more themselves, which I find a bit weird, but there must be a good reason to do this. As far as I know, Alexa still has these. Okay, so the verticals I talked about are, there are many verticals, and every year more verticals arise. But the most important ones you see here, so the top ones are the Alexa verticals and the bottom ones are the Google Assistant verticals. So you can design, for example, for social or for finance and food and drink. Thank you, Al. Oh, my daughter is bringing me food. Super nice. And entertainment device skills, that sort of thing. So you can use these to build your voice skill or action without having to do much conversation design. And many more. Okay, then the fully custom ones. There you have to design the whole conversation, like I said before, and implement everything. Okay, so how does this look? What does this look like from a technical point of view? So a user speaks to their assistant, in this case, a smartwatch or a mobile phone, and the conversation is parsed. And the most important parts of the conversation, for example, in this case, if you want to get a taxi, then you have to know where the user is physically, the location of the user. So it gets passed to the cloud, and then it gets passed onto the taxi service. In this case, that's an Alexa skill. And the Alexa skill uses your information to do a custom session conversation with you. So it's tailored to you specifically. It's very personal, hence the name personal assistant. And in the case of Google, exactly the same. This is a smart home example. So you say, I'm not going to say the key phrase because then my Google Home will go off again. Turn on the lights, and in that case, Google Assistant parses this, knows, oh, this is a smart home intent. Let me look up the smart home verticals that are implemented for this user. In this case, probably some Philips Hue light, and it forwards this request to, in this case, Philips, which turns on the lights for you in your home, and then lets Google know that it happened and succeeded. Can do more complex stuff, but this is the basic case. So in this case, there's a lambda in between everything that does a little more parsing of the conversation and gives you more control as a developer. So server side, this can look like this. So you're speaking to your assistant. The assistant passes the information, invokes a lambda in this case, a cloud function. And the cloud function does some execution and even takes into account the role you have. Dialog flow, or Google Assistant, I mean, works the same. So there's all kind of stuff you can do in the cloud, even very complex stuff. But the interface is always the assistant. So you talk to the assistant. You can hand off to the cloud if you need it, or even to your server, your enterprise data center server. Do logic, then respond. The main caveat here is that you have to do it quickly, because there are very strict norms for response times. Because if your response takes too long, the conversation feels very unnatural. Imagine someone just freezing. See, that's acting that I did just now. I wasn't actually frozen, but it felt very unnatural, right? I can hear the virtual laughs, so I will continue now. I can't get used to this virtual presenting stuff. I'm missing the interaction. So if you have some input or am laughing, please type it in the chat. Or if you think my jokes are really bad, tell me to stop. Anything. Okay, so deployment. Integrations you have to choose. And for that, you can use an API or the GUI. So in the integration, for example, in the case of Google, if you design your voice, thank you, Hendrik and MS for the conversation, for the response. Integration. So, for example, if you do a dialog flow model, if you design it, you can choose integrations. The most natural one, or the most logical one, is the Google Assistant, but you can also choose a chat integration. So you design a conversation once, but you can deploy, in this case, to many devices and applications. So in the case of dialog flow, there are many integrations to choose from. But in the case of Alexa, Alexa is available on many devices, for example. So on my phone, I have Alexa in my car, I have an Alexa at the office. There are even Alexa glasses, Alexa wall plugs, and they all integrate into your account, with your account. And so you deploy once and you have it available for your users everywhere. You can also deploy into dev and acceptance stages, so you can test your applications with a group of users. Okay. So again, this conversation. Now we're going to move on to the demo part. So you have to understand what parts of the conversation are important. So in this case, a conversation has to have a start. In this case, the invocation for my conversation is talk to namesayer. Then the namesayer responds, and it prompts the user to say something back. Their name. That's input. The input gets sent back. The namesayer parses this input and then uses it to respond. And at the end, it completes the conversation. So if I would have said, I'm Piet here, it would have responded with, hello there, Piet. In technical terms, you would call the hi there, I am namesayer an intent, a welcome intent. And the second part, a username intent. This is a term I chose, but these are all intents. that you have to define to design the technical part. The input from the user is a parameter which you can reuse in your response and then end the conversation. So like I said, the backend, you can do simple stuff. You can design voice interactions without ever touching code, which I will do in a minute. But you can also make it really complex. If you design a conversation, you have to build it. And in most cases, some super fancy black boxed machine learning algorithm will use your configuration, your design, to create a very magical assistant skill. It takes a while to do this, but it enables the users to respond in various ways and helps you make the conversation natural. So that's fully managed for you, and there's no way to do something yourself in this case. But you don't want to do this anyway, this part, because creating this is really hard work, and it took Google and Alexa and Siri years to get this a little right. I don't know if you remember Microsoft Cortana, but it's hard stuff to get right. So use it, use their work. Deploying also you can do in the GUI or in the API or using an API. So if you have a super nice CI/CD pipeline, you can use an API, or you can just click and publish. Also fully managed for you. You don't have to do anything to publish your assistant applications except use their interfaces. Okay, so the thing you've all been waiting for, the demo. Oh, wrapping up we'll do later. So I have prepared two conversations like I promised in the talk description. The same conversation, but for two assistants. So for the first, I will demo the Google Assistant part. So this is the Dialogflow interface. And I've already done this because it takes a while to build, and we don't have time for that. So I've pre-built everything. I can take you through the interface for a few minutes. So you have to choose a name for your application and maybe an image. That's it. Then you can go on to designing the intents. So you always get default fallback and welcome intents. So if in case the assistant doesn't understand you, it falls back to this one, and the welcome intent is always the starter of the conversation. So you invoke it and then it welcomes you. And here you can add responses. So in my case, I've added 4 responses. So this one you already know, and the other ones I've defined here. And the nice thing about this is that they get randomized. You have to do it correctly. So you can add several responses here. And then like this. And then you save it. And then your default welcome intent is finished. The main intent here is the say username intent. So the second part of the phrase, and you are, and then it expects the user to respond, and that response is parsed by this intent. So in this case, I say I am, and what you see here is it's highlighted, and Dialogflow already understands that this is a given name. It automatically tags this and says, oh, this is a parameter probably. It looks like a name. And if it doesn't, you can tag it yourself. So in this case, my response, my user responses always contain names. And there are some variations. So the chance that my assistant will understand the response is increased by giving multiple training phrases. And then the response I can define here. Hello there, so nice to meet you. I have to run now. And this one you will see later. So when I'm done with this, I'm almost done with my conversation design. I can press OK here and choose an integration. Now, for example, Google Assistant, I've already integrated with, which is the natural choice. But you can also, for example, choose a web demo or a Slack bot integration or Hangouts or anything you can pick here. This is the free version of Dialogflow. The enterprise version has lots more integrations. So in my case, the web demo looks like this. So namesayer is already waiting for my response. And I can say, talk to namesayer. And then it says, oh, I have to already put in my name. Pete. It says, hi there, Pete. Pleased to meet you. Goodbye. Or I'm Ronald. So it was already waiting for my input. It didn't need a welcome intent. And it responds like I designed. For the Google Assistant integration, I use the Google Actions console, and it has an overview where you can do some configuration. I'm not going through this, but the most important part for now is that you can test your integration here by using the Test tab, then choosing an integration, for example, a phone, and then you can press Talk to Namesayer here.
Okay, let's get the test version of Namesayer.
So now you get the response.
Human. Your name. What is it?
So now it picked one of the welcome intents, and now I'm going to respond. My name is, and if I do, for example, this, Donald Trump, then you will see.
What's up, Donald? Have to go. Bye.
So the funny thing here is that it already understood that my name, Donald Trump, is not only my given name, but also my last name. So it's my full name, and it's the assistant is already smart enough to parse only the given name and respond with that. So that I got this all for free. I didn't do anything to enable this. So like I said, it's a very powerful platform. I have my Google Assistant here, my Google Home. Now I'm going to use this for the same integration, to test the same integration, because my account is linked to this as well. Okay, Google, talk to Namesayer.
Got it. Let's get the test version of Namesayer. Greetings, human. Your name. What is it?
I am Pete.
Hi there, Pete. Pleased to meet you. Goodbye.
And on my phone, I can do the same. Talk to Namesayer.
Here's an answer from YouTube.
Oh, see, it didn't parse my request. Let me try again. Talk to Namesayer.
Here's a YouTube result.
It didn't understand, which happens all the time. So like I said, it has much roughness around the edges still, but if it works, it works. Maybe my intent doesn't have a very good name, or my accent is horrible. I don't know. Now let's move on to Alexa. Alexa's interface is very similar. You can choose an invocation name, Namesayer again, and then in the interaction model, define the intents here. So I'll just highlight this one. It's very similar to Dialogflow. I call it a username intent. Gave him some samples, and that's it. Because in the case of Alexa, you have to do more coding. You have to implement the response model yourself in this case. Because I chose a custom skill, I have to implement it myself. So it's still very developer friendly, because I'm editing a Lambda here that is deployed when I press deploy. But the whole Lambda part, the cloud part, is obfuscated for me. And I can stay in the developer console. So what I did, I implemented the username intent handler response here by declaring it as a request handler. And then here I've defined the response. So I'm getting the user input here by calling get slot value name, which is the variable I defined here. And my response is a XML response, as you can see, because you could do this, you could input flat text here, but you can also annotate it with tags that enable you to model the response voice. So in my case, I'm going to have an excited response, then some disappointment, and then an excited goodbye. So let's demo this. Alexa, start Namesayer.
Hi there, I am named Sayer. And you are?
My name is Piet.
Hello there, Pete. So nice to meet you, but I have to run. Goodbye now. Oh no, I forgot. I can't run. All right, Pete, goodbye.
So the main difference between the assistant, the Google Assistant response and this one is that this response feels much more natural, less robotic, less canned. And I was able to model it using these tags. So you could really hear disappointment about not being able to run. If I repeat it once.
Hello there, Pete. So nice to meet you, but I have to run. Goodbye now. Oh no, I forgot. I can't run. All right, Pete, goodbye.
So you almost feel sorry for the assistant, which is in this case is a good sign because the goal was to design a natural conversation. So I at least have the feeling that I'm talking to a sort of person. Okay, back to the presentation. I'm running 2 minutes over time, but we have some time for the Q&A. So wrapping up, voice assistants are no longer just hype, but they are also not on the plateau yet. So this means it's not Wild West any longer, but it's also not very settled. So if you see a chance to move into this space, I recommend you start learning because it's a really interesting space to be in. And it's also something that is stable yet exciting. Like in the period between the settlement of the Americas and the relative, well, let's not get into politics. Okay, and so the other thing, which you might have noticed, is that there is very little coding involved here. The coding I do for assistants is mostly on the back end of the product I'm already working on, in my case, a smart thermostat. But the implementation of the conversation and the design and the deployment are all done without coding, except for the Alexa case where you have to design the response yourself. But in the case of a smart home vertical, you don't have to do that either, or at least not this advanced. So like AWS always says, go build. This is aimed at builders, also developers, but mainly at people that just want to build technology. Maybe a Dutch joke. I don't know if you know Too Unlimited, no limit hit, but because you're already in the cloud with your assistant and your intents are already parsed in the cloud is also able to do everything you want. For example, in the case of AWS, there are tons of managed services you can use to parse your conversations and do stuff with them. For example, you could design something that enables truck drivers to complain out in the open about something that happens on the road, have it parsed by a sentiment analyzer, which is a service you can use, and then mail it to a help desk, for example. Or you can analyze the sentiment of the whole field, all automatically. Just an example. Like I said, there's lots of opportunity because it's still fairly new. And this is the same point again, because everything is so managed for you, you can focus on delivering business value. So actual business value, what the business values, so you can focus on your end user and have them get their job done. All right, chat is now here. Okay, so there was a question already. Thank you, Daniel, for the compliment. Language is English is Repco's question. So yeah, in my case, I've specifically designed this conversation for English language, but let me share my screen. Share. As you might have seen in the interface of, for example, let's say Google, a dialog flow, here you can add a language if you want to. See, so I can select an additional language, in your case maybe German, and save this. And then when I'm designing the intents, They are language specific. I'm not sure where that part went, but you can then design for multiple languages. Isan is asking me offline solutions and what is your view on privacy? And that's the same point BMR tries to make. So there's a privacy concern here, and that's a very valid one because Google especially has shown not to be all too considerate of your privacy sometimes. So I think the main problem that you're getting at here is that you are trusting, or you're doing, you have an open mic in your room, basically, like I have here. It always listens because if you speak really quickly, it always understands what you said. And this gets uploaded to the backend of the providers always. So, for example, if you open your Alexa app, you can see what you have said during the day when trying to invoke Alexa, and sometimes it understood a lot more than you expected. So that's a concern. And something you have to communicate to your users really well. I don't know if you could mitigate it. There are, of course, laws, but they have proven to not be watertight always. And the problem here is that you also cannot choose to keep the logic or the data you're inputting in, for example, in my case, in my country or in the EU. I'm not aware of a possibility to not send this to servers overseas. So that's a concern. And about offline, as Isan asked, Google, for example, has recently announced some features that enable you to use devices with voice assistant without invoking cloud functions. So it enables the device to communicate with, for example, again, a smart thermostat without going back and forth to the cloud. It does this by setting up a local connection with the device. But I think you cannot use the assistant if it is offline. So that's still an online solution. It's just quicker. BMR asks, do I need to have a developer account for Amazon? Does it cost something? So what you've just seen is all free. Amazon, in this particular case, has a huge free tier, which enables you to do a lot of stuff without paying. And the invocations of the Lambda, for example, in this case, is just a few milliseconds. So when you're going to have to pay, it's the cost is really low. But the idea behind AWS Cloud is that you can always monitor and control your costs. But the example I gave of the truck drivers complaining and then doing a sentiment analysis with machine learning, that's expensive stuff. Machine learning services are hugely expensive, but still cheaper than doing all that development yourself. So it depends on your use case. But to try this out, both demos I just gave, I did in the free tier. All right, thank you everyone, and have a nice evening.